Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. Today, we're diving into a conversation that I know will resonate with many of you who listen to the show, because I know that you're here not to just have expertise, but you really want to make a real impact. And you know, if you've been listening to me for a while, that I talk about this idea of escaping the expert trap. As I always say, I want you to be experts with your clients, with the work that you're doing, because that's why they want you, for your expertise. But when it comes to using your voice, to sharing what matters to you with your audience and what matters to them, what happens is that we so often stay behind this kind of curtain of information and data instead of sharing our ideas publicly in a bigger, bolder way. Well, my guest today has dedicated her career to helping brilliant people do exactly that. Deborah Stine has a PhD, and she's the founder of the Science and Technology Policy Academy, where she helps scientists, engineers, and health professionals translate what they know into policies that improve people's lives. And her background is incredible. It's like a dream to read on LinkedIn. Deborah has worked with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine at the Congressional Research Service, and probably my favorite position she's had. She was the executive director of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology in the Obama White House. She was a professor of the practice, engineering, and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University. So yes, Debbie has a lot of credentials and she puts them to good use. She also knows a thing or two about using your voice in rooms of power. We're going to talk about the book that she's written, the work that she does, and how you don't have to be a political insider to shape policy. So we're going to talk through all of these different ideas, including her framework, so that you can figure out how to craft your message to create change. Debbie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Carol. I'm so glad to be here.
All right, so let's talk about the work that you do now, which is your Science and Technology Policy Academy. What made you decide to leave kind of the DC political world, working at all of these impressive places, to go out on your own?
Well, when I left the White House, I was trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and I got an offer from Carnegie Mellon University and ended up moving to where I still am, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which I never thought I would in my entire life. And what I found is I was working in energy policy, primarily energy environmental policy. There's a lot of things related here to hydraulic fracturing, shale gas, things like that. And those are the classes I teach. And I worked on something called the establishing the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. And, after working, I was in DC for like 30 years, and that had been my dream. I started as a field engineer in Texas, and I made it from there to DC. Like I said, worked for the Congress, worked for the White House. And when I came to university and I started working again at the state and local level, which is where I started out in my Texas days, I really found that I enjoyed being at that ground level again. Because, when you're in DC, like I worked on, say, manufacturing policy, establishing something called the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership. There's things all over the country now, which are things to kind of help advanced manufacturing. And I did a lot of things related to manufacturing workforce. When I came here, all of a sudden I could start working trying to help people who are unemployed get those manufacturing jobs. I did focus groups with people who were, say, unemployed. I work with people who are from, say, underrepresented groups who were trying to just make a living, all sorts of things. And the same thing was true with energy and environmental issues. And I really started to enjoy, again, being right at sort of the forefront. I mean, I think most people think at the national level, you're at the forefront, and you are at the forefront of policy, but you don't necessarily see those day-to-day impacts at the national level that you will at the state and local level.
And so tell me a little bit about what your academy does now. Who do you help and how do you help them?
Well, when I first, left Carnegie Mellon University, I thought that I was going to go and start working for somebody again. And I interviewed for jobs in DC to be like an executive director and things like that. And, it just didn't appeal to me anymore. I really wanted to basically be at home with my dogs, looking at the horizon. I just wanted to be independent, right? After working for other people for so many years. And the thing in policy is have an impact, you really have to be behind the scenes, right? So I could not really express my own voice. And what happened is that as I was kind of looking and deciding what I wanted to do, what were originally side gigs, things just to kind of earn money, all of a sudden I realized, oh my goodness, I could make a business out of this. And it was only because I was actually talking to somebody who was actually a staff member at one of the major foundations here in Pittsburgh. And he said, Debbie, you should form an LLC. And I thought, oh, I guess I could. And then as soon as I sort of let people know that I was leaving, I started getting like offers of people to like do work. And I thought, oh, maybe I can do this. And then it took me a long time, maybe 6 months or so at least, to say, hey, I can make a business. And then over time, I definitely like earn as much as I did when I was a professor. And I have a lot more independence. As you know, I just came back from like a month in Southern Africa. Back in March, I spent another month around in Antarctica. Those are things I never could have done when I was a professor or any of those jobs that I had in DC. And so in terms of quality of life, it's definitely much, much better than I had. So, when I left, I started with like sort of two firms. One was consulting, which was analysis. And that's still where I get most of my income is analysis. And then the second part is more things that are teaching workshops, coaching, giving keynotes, those kinds of things. And I actually had them as two separate companies. And then over time, again, this maybe took a couple of years, I realized, why am I doing this? I need one brand, right? And I decided of the two companies that I had, that the one that had the most visibility, that people understood the most, was the Science Technology Policy Academy. A lot of my analysis is confidential. It's kind of behind the scenes. And so that brand never really had a lot of visibility. But the Science Technology Policy Academy, because it was things that were much more public, like workshops, coaching, and things of that nature, it did have a lot of visibility. And so as opposed to I should say, when I started, I did my own website and everything else. I actually hired a professional, did something that was a quality website that included all the different lines of business that I have and engage in. And like I said, I've been able to make it successful now. I think I'm getting on close to like 10 years or so since I left Carnegie Mellon.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about this idea of policy, public policy, because I'm sure that for many listeners, especially those who've never been involved in politics or even thought about influencing policy, or especially if they don't live in the Washington, D.C. area, they don't really come across it. So in their lives, they may think, well, how can I possibly impact policy? Like, I'm just one person. And even though I may have certain research that I've done, maybe I am a scientist or I'm an engineer or I'm a health professional. So I do have expertise and I do have important things that could impact policy, but I don't even know where to start or what to do. What would you tell them?
Well, the first thing is that oftentimes people sort of conflate policy and politics, right? I don't do politics. I mean, I did work for the White House for the first 3 years of the Obama administration, but I was not involved in the Obama campaign. They basically just called me one day, asked to interview me, and voila, that's how I sort of got the position. And policy is really very analytical, right? So it's things where, like what I teach is neutral policy analysis, where speaking truth to power. That means that I'm doing the analysis. I'm going to tell the policymaker that maybe their favorite idea that they really love may not be a great idea, and I'm going to tell them why. And that's, I think, super important, right? To understand that you need to take an analytical approach to policy. It's not just about like, oh, this is my opinion, but really when you're giving your opinion based on analysis, and it will have substance. So I'm going to just give an example just because I happen to see it in the newspaper this morning, actually the Pittsburgh newspaper. So one decision that the Trump administration has made is to say that nursing is no longer a professional degree. Okay. Now this has first, it's got to be one of the silliest decisions like ever, right? Um, and but it has major implications for something where we know there's a shortage of nurses, right? Nurses are like super important, as anybody who's ever had to, have healthcare or go to the hospital or have, a relative who's been sick know that nurses are often even more important than doctors, I think, in terms of your day-to-day care. And but if this decision is kept, right, then it means that it'll be harder for people who do seek nursing degrees to like get their loans repaid, and there's all sorts of negative implications. So the person who wrote this article, and it is a very long piece, an opinion article, explained this, right? And people understand it. It's something that when you really, anybody, like I said, everybody's had somebody who's been ill in their family, and you say, okay, well, that's not fair, right? And that's what you really are going for when you are talking about an issue. Your goal is for the other side, people on the other side, people generally who are unaware this is even an issue, will understand, hey, this is something that I should care about. This is something that is not fair, right? Another thing that just happened this week is Doge is finally at an end, right? Well, why did that happen? Like, it took months, right? I mean, we're now in December, this chaos started in January, so it took like a whole year. But in the end, I think it's because people saw that the decisions that were being made were not fair. I had, for example, like somebody that I had been working with for a while at West Virginia University. She had a PhD, she had a postdoc, she got her dream job with the Department of Interior. She moved her family with 2 small kids. Her husband quit her job. They moved to California, Southern California. She was in the job for 2 weeks before she lost her job. Okay, because she was a provisional employee. She didn't even have a chance to get started. Why? Because what she was doing for the Department of Interior had the word equity in it, right? And that was it. It wasn't like there's any judgment about the job or anything else. It was because it had one word, right? And I do have a happy end to the story. She was eventually able to get a job. First there was a lawsuit that led her to actually getting paid. So you can imagine, again, you had to buy a new house. I mean, imagine again, this is again where people say it's not fair. You move your family, you change everything, you bought a house, and all of a sudden, okay, chaos happens, right? And like I said, eventually a lawsuit went and gave her some back pay that kept her going for like 6 months or so. She now has a new job with the state of California. But still, people understand this stuff is not fair. And sometimes it takes time. And that's one thing you have to understand with policy is that, it can take a year. It can take a decade. I mean, things can take a long time. But eventually, if you keep on speaking truth to power, eventually things will get corrected. And that is sort of the good thing about our democracy. One thing I always say is that if you work in policy, you have to be an optimist. You have to believe that what you do and things you do will eventually lead to change. And I've been lucky throughout my career. I can tell you probably 20, 30 things where we have a better world because of studies and analysis that I have worked on with teams of experts on all sorts of issues in health, energy, environment, health, IT, and like you name it.
Yeah, and Debbie, well, thank you for sharing those examples. It brought to mind a couple that I hadn't thought of until this conversation here. So one of the women I've worked with in the past, she's a pediatrician, and she runs a group called Women in Pediatrics for other women pediatricians. And I know that there are several of them that I have talked to who oftentimes will go to their state capitals in the states where they live and advocate on behalf of their patients, so the kids, for whatever it is that they need, that the legislature is considering some bill which may be detrimental to children's health in one way or another. So they will very much use their voice and go and do that, or write op-eds in the local papers or in some type of publication. Again, taking their expertise, but then putting a story and their face and their voice on it, instead of just having it be some abstract bill that the legislature is considering.
Right. And so that's a really good example. Like, one of the things that I really try to emphasize with my clients is that, we think about policies being a federal thing, working in government, but there's lots of very important policies, particularly in healthcare, but also all these other issues as well. They're at the state and local level. And you can have just as much impact by telling your stories. And, when I teach people how to communicate, one thing I always emphasize is that I teach something called like a 1-minute policy pitch, right? And there's a couple of principles. One of the first principles is what they say, bottom line up front. At the very beginning, you say this to the policymaker: this is what you want to do. In the middle, what you do is you always tell a story with a real person, right? So I would bet those pediatricians, can say, like, okay, this happened to this person, this happened to that person. And that's what really makes an impact on policymakers. If you look at, just for example, the State of the Union speech, which is every year, and there's always people that are kind of up in the galley, right? Mm-hmm. And what they do is so they can point to that person and say, so-and-so, this happened to that person, or so-and-so, this happened to that person. And out of like could be a 1-hour speech, 45 minutes, 1 hour for the State of the Union, the only thing people remember is those stories, right?
Very true.
And when I have people do in workshops where I teach people how to do policy pitches, and sometimes there's competitions, like with them, so I travel around the country and do this sort of thing. Even though I tell people you got to have a story, sometimes the people I'm teaching don't put it in, and I have them vote, right? Or I have experts vote, and without a doubt, the one that always wins has a really good story, and the one that always loses is the ones who ignored me and thought facts and figures would make a difference.
Yes.
And it's just, we all remember stories, right?
Yes.
That's what really has an impact. And that's why it's important to, as you said, op-eds are really good, like the one I just talked about where this nurse is going to talk about, you do need those kind of facts and figures to justify these things. But what people will remember are the stories.
Where do you think the reluctance comes from, especially on that part, I feel, of the highly credentialed experts, the reluctance to include personal stories? Is it that they haven't seen it modeled for them in other people and other peers, so they feel like it's not something that they should do as well? Is it that they don't think of personal stories, or do they feel like persuasion comes from the facts and the data?
Well, I think it's kind of like all the above. Yeah. So the first one, when I teach how to do policy analysis, I focus on these 4 E's. So the first one is effectiveness. Effectiveness is the degree to which the societal goal will be met. And when we're trained as scientists or engineers or health professionals, that's what we always look at. We only look at that one thing. Will this cure this disease? Or, will this solve this environmental problem? Or will this innovation make money, right? So but that's not how people make decisions, right? So I don't care if you're buying a car, buying a house, deciding where to go to college. You're going to talk about more about effectiveness. Like, there's a million places you can get a college degree, right? For example, a car, all you need is, like you could have any car that will get you from point A to point B, but you consider a lot more things, right? And so that's where the other 3 E's come in. So let's just take, like, you're buying a car. So the second E is efficiency, and efficiency is economic efficiency. And that is basically what will get the most bang for the societal buck, right? So, maybe, like when I was young, in fact, my sister came across a picture of me. I bought this very cool red Honda Prelude, a little sports car kind of thing. And I was, it was just me. I would tool around my town back in Corpus Christi, Texas. That was where I was a field engineer. And that was great. Okay. But as I got older, I had a kid, and then I had to have transport the grandparents, and then I had the friends of the kid. And all of a sudden, right, I needed more than that, right? I needed more than getting from point A to point B and squeezing everybody in. But I could only afford so much, right? Because if you have a kid, have a house, right? So I needed to figure out, well, how can I meet the needs of my family at a decent price, right? And so I changed. All of a sudden, I went to, like, what I have now, a Honda CRV, right? Much more practical. Still Honda, right? But a different thing. The third thing is sort of equity. Equity is thinking about who are the winners and who are the losers. So then you might want to think about, say, like the size of the car, right? So yeah, sure, I probably could have had, I don't know, let's just say a Honda Civic, I could have fit everybody in, but it would have been kind of a tight squeeze, right? So, that meant that the losers would be who's ever in the back seat. It won't be me, right? Because, I'm in the driver's seat, but it would be everybody else sort of in the back seat, right? So there's always winners and losers for every policy. And you need to understand who those losers are, because you don't want the losers to lose too much, right? But you still have to keep in the effectiveness and the efficiency, the economic efficiency. The last one is ease of political acceptability. So let's just say that it doesn't mean like politics, like politicians. It means who's likely to oppose or support the policy, right? So let's just say I went and thought, okay, I'm going to get this car, but I'm going to get an orange car. Okay. Now, somehow I think that, the kids and the grandparents would say, really, Debbie, an orange car? Is that really what we want to be wandering around the neighborhood in? Or maybe a purple car, or all these different things. People are going to object to certain things. Or maybe people are going to say, well, like, why are you getting, let's just say I said, okay, I'm not going to get a Honda CRV. I'm going to get a, one of these big giant SUVs, right? And somebody say, oh, like Debbie, how, like my colleagues are going to say, hey, why are you driving around the giant SUV? Do you really need that big of a car? Think about what you're doing to the environment, right? And that goes into equity issues, ease of accessibility issues. So those things, efficiency, like I say, effectiveness, efficiency, equity, ease of acceptability are really how we make all our decisions, that we just don't really realize it. We kind of internalize it. Policymakers are the same way. So going back to your original question, the challenge is that when we are trained as scientists, engineers, and health professionals, we are not trained to look at these other things. We're not trained to look at cost. We're not trained to look at public acceptability. We're not trained to look at equity issues. And because of this, we don't do a very good job communicating, because fundamentally we have been trained that the facts should speak for themselves. And the answer is the facts do not speak for themselves.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your 4 E's. I love frameworks. So that is, that is definitely right up my alley. So thank you for that. So let me ask you this, Debbie. So when we think about, especially a lot of the clients that you work with, or just people who come to you or who are in your world, the scientists and the engineer and the health professionals, obviously, and very rightly so, they are very deep into the details of their research. Oftentimes they spend years studying it. They're doing research. They're putting together the data and the analysis to draw conclusions from it. So it's very precious to them. Plus, they are very familiar with it, with all the jargon, the vocabulary, the conversations that their research is a part of. But then you go to either the public or to policymakers, and they don't have that familiarity at all. I remember we were working with some faculty at the University of California, and there's one woman, she has a PhD in engineering, and she was talking about cement and concrete and making it more environmentally friendly and how to do that. And so I had to help her find a story to do that, because cement and concrete, like, we don't know. Like, for those of us who don't work in that, that's not our thing. So when you're thinking about the people that you work with, how do you help them to kind of pull their head out of the minutiae and get them to see the bigger bird's eye view to translate that to the public and to policymakers?
Well, the first thing is I really work on them getting a good headline, right? So, like I imagine, and I know you know like how to do keynotes and these other things, right?
Hmm.
Okay, probably I suspect that one of the things you do is you need a good headline for your talk. You need something that will grab people's attention and bring them in and do these things. So when I'm teaching like works, in fact, I'm going to be at the University of Virginia like in about a month actually, doing this workshop with University of Virginia's graduate students. And I will work with them over the course of the day to get it so whatever their key message is, they can get it down to initially that one sentence, that headline, the things, like the way I explain it is that, like when they themselves, right, they're looking through, say, an online, right, and they're, maybe whatever it is, whether it's like they're on LinkedIn or they're on some I don't know, through Facebook or just their journal. It doesn't matter what it is. They're looking right at those headlines, those titles, and they're saying, should I read or listen to this or should I not? Right. And that's really the first key is getting it so they can get it down to that one sentence, the one thing they want people to remember and they want people to do differently, right? So you're not just saying like nurses are important or something like that. You're saying, change the policy of nurse of those getting nursing degrees to make it a professional, degree, right? So you're saying very, very clear what is you want them to change, and it can only be one thing.
Yes.
It cannot be 500 things, right? So when I teach them analysis, right, I say, okay, you have to first start with the status quo. That status quo is the current policy. And then you look at two different policy options. And I say, in the end, you have to pick only one. That's it. You cannot combine the two together. You cannot do anything else. You got to pick one. And the one that you pick needs to be based on analysis. It needs to be based on evidence, not just your opinion. Oh, I think we should do solar. I think we should do wind. Well, solar doesn't necessarily make sense where I am here in Pittsburgh, you know, yet it might also make sense in Arizona, right? So I teach them how to really get down to that one sentence. I teach and say, hey, you got to find a story. So I teach them how to find a story, or something that they can use that they can like bring several stories together, just like a author does to kind of illustrate what they need to do. And then somehow they need to also connect it to whomever it is they're speaking, the policymaker to whom they're speaking, right? And that means understanding them, understanding their jurisdiction, what it is they have control over and not have control over. So the governor of Pennsylvania, for example, can't make policy for New Jersey, right? Um, and the governor of Pennsylvania, he can only do so much on, say, STEM education because STEM education is generally a local issue, right? And so it's no good to tell a policymaker to do things that they legally cannot do, right? It needs to be something that relates to their constituency and to what it is that they can do legally, and also that kind of relates to their background and their interest. If somebody is like not at all interested in, I don't know, climate change, it's no good trying to convince that person to do something on climate change. Instead, you have to take a different route. So, like one example, like in this region, in fact, there's an article, I think maybe in the New York Times, about flooding. So, flooding in Appalachia is a really big issue. So, you don't talk to, say, a West Virginia policymaker about climate change. Instead, you talk to them about flooding.
Mm-hmm.
You talk to them about the impact, the economic impact of flooding, about the impact on businesses and on the community, things that they care about, right? They care about West Virginians. They care about the economy. don't try to convince them that climate change is causing flooding, although it is, right? There's plenty of data for that, but that's not what you want to focus on. Instead, you focus on the end goal, which is hopefully getting West Virginia, West Virginia to invest more in flooding protection because it will help their people, not because of climate change.
Right. It reminds me of the old saying, do you want to be effective or do you want to be right?
There you go.
Right?
That's a good way of putting it. Yes. Do you want to be
Yes.
effective or do you want to be right? Yeah.
Yes.
And so one of the workshops I teach is how to interact with people with whom you disagree. And this is an example. And part of it is just first being respectful, and not talking down to them, not criticizing them because they don't believe that climate change is happening, all these different things. That's the first thing. The second is listening. You really need to be a good listener, make a connection with them. Everybody can make some connection. Maybe it's because you both have dogs. Maybe it's, because, you watch the same football teams or so, whatever it is, you need to somehow make a connection, like with that person before you really kind of dive in to whatever it is that you are there to talk about. And I understand this is challenging. Back when I was a field engineer, I had a boss who was a former NASA engineer, right? But he was head of this regional office that I was part of. This is for the Texas's Air Pollution Agency. And, I would go and I would give a violation to some company because they violated some air pollution laws. And they would come in for a meeting. And he would spend, I swear, the first 15, 20 minutes talking about football, I don't know, the weather. It just drove me crazy. And then we would finally get to it. I did not understand that when I was like 25 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
I now understand it, right? And we are not taught in the STEM world how to communicate with other people. We should, or maybe it should be part of our general education, whatever. I went to the University of California for engineering school. I wasn't taught any of that, even though I did learn a lot about literature and all these other things, but I was not taught how to communicate about anything related to STEM.
Yes. And I feel like that is most industries, even, and I mean, STEM specifically, but even so many other ones. And, so I've been involved in Democratic politics for over 20 years now. And, I know, Debbie, you don't do the politics side, you're on the policy side, and I'm on the politics side. But I will say that, seeing what has happened with the Democratic Party, specifically in the past year with last year's election, and then what happened earlier this year and their inability to stand up to the Trump administration, is that I feel like, and this is my own little separate soapbox rant, you don't have to comment on this unless you want to, is that and I'm including myself in this, is that the Democrats got so fixated on purity test for making sure that every person checked every single box for whatever the different issues were, rather than figuring out how can we connect with voters so that they understand that we are listening to them and we're on their side and we want to help them and we want them to understand how to help themselves, like to aspire to that American dream. And we totally took our eye off the ball. And hence, this is where we're at. But I'm thinking, based on November's elections, and now we're getting back into the right frame of mind for next year in the midterms.
Yeah, no, but I agree with you. Yes, no, I totally agree. And, even, there, in fact, I was just actually mentioning this to somebody, I think like yesterday, there was a certain kind of like holier than thou kind of mentality that sort of pervaded or still pervades in some ways, like a good portion of the Democratic Party. And it's making, as opposed to saying we are, it's us, right? Like, we're all like Americans and things like that. But thinking that we're better than other people or all these other kinds of things, it just is a losing proposition. And just as basically the same thing as I said with the people with whom we disagree. Well, if people don't feel that you have that you respect them, then they're going to feel, hey, you're not going to listen to me. One of the big changes, and this was actually a very good thing that happened during the Biden administration, was in the scientific world is a memo come out from HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, about honoring what they call lived experiences. And so what that means is that when you are having like a conversation with somebody, like let's just talk about flooding in West Virginia, right? Well, we can have all the data that we want about flooding, right? But equally important is not just the scientific quantitative data, but the lived experiences of the West Virginians who have lived in these communities for, like, maybe their family has lived in there hundreds of years, right? They know the flooding, when it happens, why it happens, all those different things. And so what this memo did was say, hey, we need to incorporate it, and it is important as lived experiences. Now, the challenge that occurred is that, I talked about equity. Equity is one of the fundamental principles of policy analysis, the fairness of the policy, things like that. The word equity just got focused so much on DEI that the concept of equity as fairness, which is what it means in policy analysis, and saying that we need to be fair and honor this kind of knowledge, it got lost, right? And so that one, like one of the things I teach is equity analysis. I have for a really, really long time, and it really is understanding that fairness, understanding and involving that community. And that's one of the things that I did a whole sort of 5-part webinar series for an organization called Innovate US that talked about community engagement and honoring that knowledge. One of the things when I was in Africa, I met a guy and he said, well, I just don't know as much. I never went to school, right? And I said, look, just because you didn't go to school doesn't mean that you don't have a lot of knowledge. It's learned knowledge. It's learned in real life, right? But yeah, it is, and I think it's sort of, even as we, go into this, like the next election, it's still not a done deal, right? Because we still do have definite challenges in interacting with real people and honoring them regardless of their status in terms of their assuming that you're better than
Right.
or, sorry, that you're better than them for any of these other purposes. And it's a very frustrating thing for me, to do, particularly since I was a field engineer for 5 years. I spent a lot of time on the road talking to people. We really just need to try to have more engagement. But it's a real challenge because everybody's busy, including the people with whom we want to engage, right? And then the feeling is, okay, you're going to talk to them or try to convince them as opposed to listen to what it is they have to say.
Yes. All right. Very well said, Debbie. So I'm going to make a 90-degree turn here, and we're going to talk about AI, which of course is still related to science and technology. It's just a different aspect of it. So we actually met because we have a mutual connection, and she had gone through my automated amplify with AI program that I ran over the summer, and it was a lot of fun. And I taught a bunch of AI automations for content creation. So she mentioned you must have been talking with Stephanie, and she mentioned the program to you. So you reached out, and so then I gave you access to the self-paced version of the program because you were going on your trip to Africa and you very much wanted to keep up with your LinkedIn newsletter and some of your other content creation. And so voila, AI automations came to the rescue. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did with those and what you found the benefits were?
Yeah, so Stephanie is somebody. Her organization, I think, is called Rising Engineers, and I've known her for a good number of years. I guess maybe 5 years. So we were part of like an educational activity together for quite a while, and we were just kind of chit chatting, updating. And she said, "Oh, I went through this thing and so forth, and it's like the best $500 I ever spent." I said, "Oh, really?" And I myself have been doing a lot on AI, so I've been doing analysis on AI data centers. I have a whole series of webinars that I've done on them from like an environmental and manufacturing kind of standpoint. And then I also teach things about AI, how to apply Gen I for policy analysis, program evaluation, all the different things that I teach. But I had never really, and this has happened to me before, I never really thought about applying it that much to my own business, right? And so I went, to your website and I watched sort of the video. And I thought, oh, that could really kind of help me do these things. And what I liked about it was the concept of, I don't want to produce things that are generic, right? So a lot of what things I produce, there's a lot of scientists and engineers and health professionals out there looking for jobs right now because of the Trump administration. And it's unexpected for them. They thought they were in their dream jobs. They thought they'd be there for the rest of their lives. And so I have a lot of people, that I'm trying to help. And I don't want to like not help them while I go on my adventures, all of which is, as I say, were planned pre-Trump, right? And so I do, so I actually produce 4 LinkedIn newsletters. One is like an opinion newsletter. One is a jobs newsletter. So it's for people who are looking for science, technology, policy jobs. And so I have over like 100 listings every week that I collect from LinkedIn. And then I have one which is about my book. It's kind of like Science, Technology, Policy 101. But the one that I really wanted to keep up, while I was gone, was what I call it was Dear Debbie. So Dear Debbie is where people send in questions like anything that's sort of career related, like, well, what is this ATS resume thing, and like, how do I do it? Or the one that's actually coming out tomorrow is, what should I do during the holiday season? Should I keep looking for a job? What should I do? All these different things, right? So when I produce these, I want to, answer them with things that are in like my voice, right? And so that's what really appealed to me. So what I did is as I was trying to figure this out, I have a lot of content that is, because of my book, because of all these posts and things that I've been generating. I have all the workshops. I give, like I said, like 40 different workshops, as all these different things. So I have all that content. And so I thought, okay, well, all I do is I upload all this content. And then I had never used Make before. I had never even heard of Make until you did it. But I was using like ChatGPT to kind of help give me some ideas for what to say. So I have my own ideas about how to solve these problems, but I always like to send it through ChatGPT or do something because other people have good ideas too, right? Not just me. And so I went and I it took me a while, but I spent like, I don't know, a weekend putting all this stuff in, getting it to work. I did have this one glitch, which you helped me fix very quickly, which I appreciate because it's just a little tiny thing. Those are the things that do then. And so what I did is I picked the topic. So I run a co-working space for the people that I coach. And I said, give me questions that you guys have. And so what I did is I just put those questions in and really short, like the holiday one is a good example. That came from one of my coaching clients. And she said, oh, I'm trying to figure out what to do about during the holiday. Should I stop looking for a job? What is that I should do? And so I put it in. And then miracle of miracles, poof, all of a sudden I have something for my LinkedIn newsletter, Dear Debbie, where it basically says, okay, here it is. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't change it, because I do. But I start out with a very, very solid first draft that sounds like me. It was able to, like for ChatGPT, I was already had a relatively long prompt that I had kind of been modifying here and there. And so I was able to use that as part of this make process. And then I could produce basically, I don't know, in a morning, let's just say, maybe 4, like a month's worth of these Dear Debbie columns. And because they're not time sensitive, like my opinion thing is very time sensitive, but these are not time sensitive. And so as a result, I can just produce a whole bunch of them, get it off my list of things to do. I go and I upload them into LinkedIn so that they're just ready to go. And one of my colleagues said, wow, it's like really amazing, Debbie, how you're sending out all this content while you're in Southern Africa. And I said, yeah, well, it's because I did all the work before I left. Now that I'm back, I'm still planning to do it. Like sometime probably this weekend, I will generate all the content for December. And because I do, again, 4 newsletters on LinkedIn, um, I do need to try to reduce the amount of time I spend as possible, because of course none of these pay me income.
Right.
But on the bright side, they have been successful in bringing me coaching clients, right? Because I've been doing coaching for years and years, but it's only been in the past year or so that I got certified by the International Coaching Federation, that I decided to make coaching a serious part of my business, not just something like I did on a very haphazard kind of basis. So anyhow, I thank you. It really has worked well. I am hoping now that I was really having to do it very quickly to try to get done before my trip, but I'm hoping in December I can advance to, doing something that is more voice oriented, because now that, like when I wrote my book, and it was just going to be too much hassle to do a audiobook, but I know I myself only listen to audiobooks. So I know it's important. So I'm hoping to take, again, all this content now that I have on LinkedIn, and plus my book, and then use it to do, maybe some, a very clear podcast. I like the fact that that was the other thing, that you clearly say, hey, this is like AI Carol, right? So my world is fine with saying this is AI Debbie doing this, because I think people appreciate the fact that, for some of them, podcast and things that are by sound are their best way. They just don't have time to read, right? And for me, like I said, I myself, I don't read books as often as I do in the evening, like fun books, because I spent all day reading online. And the last thing I want to do, sometimes my eyes are just too tired to read. And I want something that's oral, not
Yes.
written.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is why I called it automate and amplify with AI, very much to that point, because I wanted to create a repeatable system, where literally a one-click button to generate this new, on-brand, high-quality content based on your existing content library, and then also do an audio version. So for those of you listening who have not yet checked out my companion podcast called Confident Speaker by AI Carol, definitely check it out. You will find it sounds pretty much exactly like I sound right here. And it literally, at a click of a button, and in 1 minute, it produces an entire episode. And it's good content because it's based on my content library. It's not just some generic random content from the internet that is pulling together. Yeah. So I'm excited for your podcast, Debbie, and having more people be able to consume your work, your expertise, your knowledge, so that they can have a greater impact in their careers and on public policy as well. So for those of you listening, look in the show notes. I have links to Debbie's LinkedIn profile. Definitely connect with her there so you can check out her LinkedIn newsletters. I have a link to her website as well. And check out Confident Speaker, my AI podcast. And if you want to check out the AI program that we just talked about, link in the show notes there as well. Debbie, thank you so much for coming on the Speaking Your Brand podcast.
Thanks, Carol. It's been great. A lot of fun.
Until next time, thanks for listening.